It's been a long time since we've been able to talk about OWCS. A 2-month break plus a pit stop at the Esports World Cup will do that to you. But now that it's August, we dive right back into the action. And of course, Asia is gonna start us off. More specifically, we've got to talk about Korea. Welcome to the OWCS Stage 2 Korea Power Rankings and Preview by yours truly, where we're going to break down all 8 participants, their main storylines, and my general expectations before actually watching any of them go head-to-head. Before diving into all of that though, a quick refresher on how this format works, as it's been a really long time and there are a couple of changes they've made compared to Stage 1. So just like Stage 1, this thing is going to comprise of a couple of different phases. First will be a round-robin group stage, where every single team plays each other once, and then from there we decide some seeding deciders. There's going to be a play-in match to decide who goes on to that playoff bracket in Korea, and then the top 3 teams, plus a wild card, will go on to eventually play in the Asia tournament with the Pacific and Japanese teams, to ultimately decide in the end who is going to the final tournament of the year, who is going to represent this region in the first ever OWCS championship in Sweden. And just like the last time, you can watch all of these games on the Overwatch Esports YouTube and Twitch channels starting on August the 9th, and it'll run all the way until September 15th before we move into the next phase. A major formatting change that's worth keeping in mind though is that we're only going to have 8 teams in Korea as opposed to the 9 that we saw in Stage 1, and there's not going to be a cutoff spot. Everybody's going to have their opportunity to play in a tournament. Obviously, having a higher seed will help you out a lot, but nobody's going to be on the cusp of elimination at any point until we get into official bracket play. If all that makes sense, let's shift the spotlight to our 8 challengers, going over the main storylines, their rosters, and the general consensus around how strong they could be in this upcoming stage. Let's get the top 4 out of the way. You already know who these guys are. They qualified automatically because they did so well in Stage 1. That's Falcons, Crazy Raccoon, Zeta Division, and Fnatic. These 4 rosters are mostly the same to what we saw in Esports World Cup, with a couple of exceptions, starting with probably the most interesting move coming from Team Falcons. The core from Stage 1 is still there, but added into the mix is none other than the hitscan legend himself, Happy. The man who once seemed to be retiring from professional play is ready to go back out there and play for one of the best teams in the world. This move went slightly under the radar as there was no real official announcement surrounding it, but it's clear that Falcons knew something had to change based off of yet another disappointing result in Esports World Cup. It's very painfully obvious they are still a ways behind Crazy Raccoon after the brutal choke that we witnessed in the Esports World Cup against them. So, just knowing that, while you have a quick break, you've got to make some kind of urgent change, and Happy just might be what they need. He's already proven at the highest level possible, and based off of some of the things I've heard, Proper, while he doesn't mind playing hitscan, would much prefer to play his more natural flex / projectile tracer role. So really, you could be checking off a couple of boxes at once here, making your superstar DPS a lot more comfortable out there, but also getting a more natural hitscan, which is something that a lot of people have been begging Falcons to do for months now. However, with this signing comes a very interesting question you have to ask. How is this DPS rotation going to work? Proper and Stalker are always going to be starting caliber players, but now you're in a scenario where, depending on the meta and the composition you want to play, one of them could be on the bench for the entire series. It's a very delicate situation that hopefully Krusty and the coaching staff can handle with care. It seems like a good problem to have when you have 3 really talented players, but oftentimes that could lead to some really crazy things behind the scenes. And that's not even where the issues end for this roster. As good as they are, as respectable as all of the names are, we can't deny, and I'll be one of the last people to say this because I've defended them for a long time, but you can't deny that Hanbin and Smurf, especially in the Esports World Cup, didn't always look up to par with their competition. I give it up to Smurf. It felt like he played pretty well in that Crazy Raccoon series, but generally, I haven't seen the same results from these elite tank players that I've seen in years past. It feels like they're falling behind the Crazy Raccoon tank line and some of these other guys, so these guys have to step up as well if Falcons want to reach the top. This is a lot different compared to how we were feeling about this team heading into Stage 1. There's some uncertainty around these boys now. They have some questions to answer. The confidence is no longer sky high, and honestly, If they aren't able to compete and or beat Crazy Raccoon this go around, that really might be the breaking point. Concerns aside though, this still is a really good Overwatch team. There is no doubt about that. Honestly, it just comes down to whether or not they can beat their rivals, and that's not a bad problem to have. You have confidence that they can beat anybody else out there. The names on this team are amongst some of the most respected out there. Even if they haven't played as great in recent memory, they still have what it takes and they have the upside to be all-time great levels of good. The other team who made a slight roster change by mostly just getting rid of a player is Zeta Division. Unfortunately, Fearless is no longer going to be on this team. It seems like this was just a pit stop for him, just to help that team in the Esports World Cup. He's officially enlisting in the military, and we will probably never see him play professional Overwatch ever again. Really sad stuff, and wish the best for him, but that's just how it goes. But still, this Zeta Division team should still be really good. The entire rest of the core is still there. This 5-man roster can be one of the best for sure, although we do have to wonder how they're feeling after the colossal choke that happened in the Esports World Cup against an NA team with that Violet Ajax and all. They've got to shake that off, have short-term memory, and get back out there and play confidently, because what we saw at their peak was very impressive during OWCS Stage 1, going toe-to-toe with Falcons and Crazy Raccoon and putting up a better fight than basically any other team out there. This team is extremely likable, but what they have to figure out is how they can play better under pressure. Both in Korea and the Asia tournament, as well as Esports World Cup, they always seem to be their own victim of choking at the worst possible moments. Between horrible barrages from alphaYi, missed Bob placements from Flora, and crazy Ajaxes from Violet, they just always get in their own way, which keeps them from greatness. Sometimes it's not even the other team playing better than them, which is honestly such a shame knowing the talent they have. So yeah, they've got to learn to get out of their own way and elevate themselves to that final level. Not to mention, maybe we'll be looking out to see how this team does, knowing that they don't have any backups in place. With just this starting 5, they have no backup tank options anymore, now that Fearless is gone, which means that once again they could have a potential hole with this team when it comes to Winston play. Bernard's been excellent so far in OWCS, but he just can't do everything himself, and you have to wonder if that will ultimately hold this team back against some of the big guns. But nonetheless, even with concerns in mind, this still is a really good team. They still should be one of the most consistent and reliable in all of Korea, and you should fully expect them to be in a top position to fight in the Asia playoffs later down the line this September. Everything else with the top 4 is basically all the same, which is unfortunate for some of these competitors, as that means Crazy Raccoon is still stronger than ever. What is there to really say about this team that hasn't already been said? They're an elite team that just keeps on winning. They've barely lost any games so far in all of OWCS, plus the Esports World Cup. They've now won back-to-back championships between DreamHack Dallas and that Esports World Cup, and they've looked dominant across the board, beating everybody so incredibly easily. It really feels like nothing is going to stop this team from going on a tear. With how dangerous they look, with how everybody holds their own weight, they're the most well-rounded team and arguably the best coached in all of Overwatch. Everything about this team is just so insane. Everybody feels like they're in their literal prime right now. Lip, even after doing this for like 4 years, still looks like the best DPS out there. Heesing has a case for best flex DPS in the world. Junbin and Max are realizing their potential. Shu still looks like a god amongst men, and pairing him up with Chorong is simply not fair. There's just no bad things to say about this team right now. What do they have left to accomplish aside from winning Stockholm? They've done everything. It feels like the 2021 Dragons in a way, where you just know they're gonna win, and it feels like it's so effortless for them, like there's no pressure whatsoever and everything comes so easy. That's the mindset that a lot of people are with Crazy Raccoon right now. The only possible thing you could say about them, the only small concern would be how they do over a long season like this. Can they continue to be this dominant without burning out? The fact is, there's still about 4 months left to play before we end this season, before the championship is over, and as we've seen in the past, sometimes long seasons like this can exhaust teams. This marathon of a race can burn you out if you're not careful, so hopefully they can stay in the right mindset and avoid that so we don't see one of the biggest blunders in Overwatch history. But knowing them, they'll be completely fine. Then there's Fnatic, the 4th top tier team, and they more so feel like underdogs. They always have since OWCS Stage 1. They have more questions than the rest of the guys that we've gone over so far in this video. They're a relatively young team, they made some big time roster changes, and so far they haven't panned out that great. They did not look all that impressive in the Esports World Cup. They struggled in basically every game they played, and if we're being honest, they shouldn't have even made it out of the group stage if it weren't for an absolutely ridiculous tiebreaker system. Now, you might want to give them the benefit of the doubt. It was their first tournament together. They're still adjusting to life with this new team. But the fact is, they looked a lot more composed out there when they had their initial core as Yeti. So far, Checkmate seems to be holding his own. He was a key playmaker in a lot of those EWC games, but as a result, we saw less and less of Viper, who was so important to this team's success and was such a huge reason why they were even in a position to be in the Esports World Cup to begin with. Figuring out this DPS situation is going to be a very difficult challenge to make sure they have the right balance of what they need without missing out on any potential carries, not to mention that they have 3 flex DPS and not a true dedicated hit scan, which could also severely hurt their chances. This team has a very specific identity with dive, and if it doesn't work, it always seems like it blows up in their face, and right now we're still in a very similar situation. Honestly though, the DPS may be the least of their concerns. This identity can still make them a solid team. Where you really start to worry about this team, at least based off of what we saw in World Cup, is with that backline. I'll be the first to admit, Ryujehong and Izayaki, as excited as I was to see them join this team, have not looked like a great fit so far. They've continued to look like very washed up players out there, the rust is piling up like crazy, and they're going to have to play a lot better if this Fnatic team wants to maintain their status as one of the best in Korea, because what I saw in Esports World Cup is not it. They severely held their team back from finding success and winning any major games in the tournament. We know what they're capable of based off of the past, but you can only give them the benefit of the doubt for so long. For now, I'd like to think there's still an opportunity for them to play better. Again, the new members of this team haven't been there for that long. There's a lot of adjustments that the coaching has to make. These guys have to synergize better. They have to find the right strategy that works for them. But if things continue early on and even into the mid parts of this group stage, then we're really going to have to hit the panic button, and their top 4 status will severely be in question. But I will say, if they can figure those things out, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to maintain their status as the top half of Korea. There's a lot of things to like about this team, but there's just so much that can go wrong at the same time. This team is a massive gamble, and it truly feels like a 50-50 on whether or not they'll flop, or continue to be that fun underdog that many people have fallen in love with. That's the rundown of some of the favorites, the top 4 who made it here automatically because of their Stage 1 play, but what about the other 4? The ones that weren't so lucky, the ones that had to grind through open qualifiers in a similar fashion to what we saw in Stage 1, where a bunch of very familiar Korean faces all were going head-to-head online. The team I want to start with maybe isn't the most competitive of this group, but is extremely interesting. You've seen it because of the thumbnail, the elephant in the room. Ryujehong is back in professional Overwatch. Yes, for the first time since 2022 in an Apex exhibition show match that really didn't mean that much, Jaehong is taking the stage in a LAN environment on a pro team as part of Old Ocean. In the previous stage, we saw him messing around with some other former legendary Korean players that everybody loved to death. It didn't work out too well for them, but now here in Stage 2, he actually made it through. He's literally as OG as it gets, one of the most legendary players in all of Overwatch history. The retired 32-year-old veteran is making his return to Overwatch esports, at least for this temporary stage. Now with that said, as exciting as this is, and as much as we'd all love to see Jaehong do well, we've got to temper expectations, as this team isn't that great on paper. It's hard to see them being ultra competitive, and Jaehong's probably going to be the weak link on this team, especially based off of some of the leaked scrims that we've seen. However, there still are some likable aspects about this team that could make them have some competitive outings against some of these other bottom teams. Becky, Probe, and Haejeokdon seems like a pretty good DPS tandem. Becky and Probe could end up being pretty good carries on this team, and Haejeokdon has a lot of untapped potential as an 18-year-old prospect. And on the other side of things, while Ryujehong isn't great, Faith has been a reliable main support for years now. There's some things on this team that make me somewhat excited, but is it enough? Can the 4 players I just named carry the rest of this team to greatness? I'm not so sure about that, especially because along with Ryujehong, the tank situation is maybe a bit weird. Nonetheless, I'll watch this team with great joy. The Becky Mafia is gonna have fun, and Ryujehong as well, just being back in general, just makes it worth putting some investment into them, just for the sake of turning back the clock and remembering the good old days. The question is there any team out there they can finish above in this tournament for sure? Well, if we're going to put money on it, their best opportunity will be against Vec, aka Vesta Crew, who somehow made it back here for the second stage in a row, so props to them for that. The team that unfortunately went winless in stage 1 of OWCS Korea is going to give it another go. They have a similar core to the last time, with Dart still being on the team, but they made some changes throughout the roster in hopes that this time they can actually win a game. Will it be enough? I'm not too sure about that. Not that much interest in this team if we're being brutally honest. Expectations are super low, so we'll keep it there and we'll move on to the next team. And said team I want to move on to is Haejeokdon. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, but it's an interesting mix of some of the players we saw from Runaway in stage 1, but with a new backline plus Sunjun into the mix. Now, after watching this team collapse the way they did in stage 1 of Korea, expectations are a bit tampered for me. I'm not as excited as I would have been, and I'm probably not going to rate them as highly since it's a lot of the same players, and they've just been known for choking in big moments recently. However, it still is a fairly likable team that could be in contention for a top 4 spot. Zest, Sunjun, and Prophet on paper is a pretty solid DPS line. Zest and Prophet were a bit inconsistent throughout their time in stage 1 of OWCS, but with Sunjun there to give them another option, maybe that could help give them the edge they need. Sunjun's never really been on a solid team before in his career, outside of like NA when he was on TSM, which again, really wasn't that great and the reign didn't last all that long. He's shown me he can flex, he can come in and out of the lineup as needed, and that could be the exact thing this team needs to give them some stability. Honestly though, consistency may only be a small part of this equation, as more than anything else, they have a completely new backline in place here. Gone are the days of Ryujehong and Vigilante, and Vindame and Lee Soo-min come in to take their place. Two guys we're very familiar with that have had some up and down careers so far. Lee Soo-min and Vindame in recent memory haven't been anything that impressive. After the Shock days, Vindame lost a lot of his credibility. He gained some of it back on Seoul Dynasty, of course, but generally kind of held in a similar light to Ryujehong, where you have questions on whether or not he still has it. As for Lee Soo-min, he's just never hit that top level before. We haven't seen him get there. We've seen the potential for a couple of years. It's a guy we've rated in the past, but he just hasn't found that consistency just yet, and there's worries about his hero pool as well. When I look at this team, I just feel weird about it. I just don't know how to feel. There's room for them to crash and burn and be more towards the bottom, but with some of the names on this team, it feels like they should be able to fight for top 4 potentially. Do you invest in the idea that they've choked already and that it's going to hold them back? Or do you look at the upside and the fact that they're changing some things up to maybe make this team better? Definitely feel like one of the wild cards of this event, but definitely not the only one, as that title also belongs to Poker Face, another familiar team who, while they did make some changes, are eerily similar to what we saw beforehand, and they were actually a pretty competitive team in OWCS Stage 1. They made some upsets happen, and they finished a lot higher than a lot of people thought they would. Now they come in with a slightly revamped team, but with still a lot of the same upside they once had before. That proud Choisewan DPS line could be extremely potent. Choisewan hasn't had the best of luck lately. This could be his last hurrah potentially. He still seems like he could be a nice player though, and maybe a shakeup in a more stable team like this could be the exact thing he needs to get back on top of the world. But honestly, what makes this team the most exciting to me is the fact that they have one of the most underrated backlines out there. Simple, Karu, and Fixa may not be superstars on a surface level, but on paper, they're all very consistent players, and sometimes that consistency is what ultimately wins you games over star power that is maybe a bit up and down when it comes to that consistency factor. Simple's a guy who's been receiving praise in the scene for many years now, and if this is indeed his starting job, I think him and Fixa will complement each other very nicely, and we'll see this team pick up some wins against some teams that maybe they have the disadvantage against on paper. Outside of Bellows Rhea potentially being really mid, I don't have that many complaints about this team. It's well-rounded, it has a lot of likable guys, not a lot of star power, but not a lot of bad pieces either. After watching the main core of this team do a lot better than I expected in Stage 1 of Korea, I'm low-key excited to watch this new version of Poker Face go out there and take the stage once again. I firmly have confidence in this team to potentially sneak into that top 4, top 5 spot during the group stage. And with that, the contestants are set. Those are the 8 rosters that are going into Korea Stage 2 that will enter the Gulag, with only 4 coming out with the possibility of making it to the next stage. Here's my pre-Stage 2 power rankings of this group before getting an opportunity to watch any of them on the main stage. So obviously number 1's Crazy Raccoon. Don't even need to discuss it. They're just so much better than everybody else in the world right now, and until proven otherwise, they just have to stay here. Now with number 2, I think it's safe to still go with Falcons. They're maybe a little bit boomed after losing to Crazy Raccoon for like the millionth time, but with Happy there, it's an exciting new beginning, and just compared to the rest of their competition, they should still be okay. With number 3, gotta stick with Zeta Division. Maybe some concerns after that horrendous choke in Esports World Cup, but generally still a very consistent roster. They've been together for a lot longer than a lot of these other teams, so they'll have that stability plus the star power to probably keep moving forward. It's just a matter of if they can punch up to the level of Falcons or Crazy Raccoon, and right now that is yet to be determined. 4th place, it's gotta be Fnatic, at least for now. I'm not that confident in them being here. They've shown some great upside, but they have a lot of questions to answer with how that DPS line's gonna function, and if Ryujehong and Izayaki can still be a reliable backline mid-2024. There's a lot of room for this team to sink compared to what we saw by the end of Stage 1. They've always been a rather inconsistent, underdog-like team with a very certain playstyle that could be easily read depending on the opponent. So this is one of those wild cards who are probably still going to be in contention to at least be like top 6, but how much further they can go is going to be super interesting to see. Then with the bottom half is where things maybe get a little interesting, as I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Poker Face end up as the number 5 team, and they continue to rise compared to what we saw in Stage 1. I like that they're young and they have a lot of motivation. It feels like they could be one of the more stable and consistent rosters out there, and I just like them more compared to some of these other teams below them that have these clear-cut flaws. A team like Haejeokdon, I think, has better talent on paper, for example, but the inconsistencies of what I saw with that core on Runaway, plus the backline concerns, makes me think that they could end up in another situation where they start off strong and then choke horrendously. I'm just not over what I saw in Stage 1. I know it's good to kind of have an open mentality always and to not stay in the past, but I've been feeling this way for a long time about some of those players on that team. It just happens over and over again. I'm hoping my boy Sun Jun can make a difference, but I'm not going to get my hopes up. With number 7, I think it's a good place for Old Ocean. They could maybe go as high as like 5, depending on Poker Face and Haejeokdon and if they're inconsistent or not. But generally, they feel like they have a very weak roster. I'm not confident at all in the tank line, and Ryujehong, as much as I love the guy, in his old age may not be able to keep up with this new generation of players. Based off of what we've already seen so far, he's probably going to be a hindrance to his team. Now, please, Becky Mafia, don't come after me here. It has absolutely nothing to do with Becky and the DPS line. If anything, they will be the carries of this team, and they will be the most exciting aspect that keeps them in matches. So don't hate on me. It just has to do with the Team Becky fans. I promise you, nothing against him. Don't cancel me. And then at the very bottom, I think it's fair to go with Vec. Maybe they could end up getting 7th, depending on the old Ocean situation, but generally, they should probably still struggle big time. Outside of a couple of names like Dart, for example, not that much to be excited about. Lots of young players with so much to prove, and against a lot of veterans like this, I don't know how I like their chances. So they're definitely going to be 7 or 8. They can't be any higher. But yeah, that's my thought process on Korea right now. This should be a really fun time. This tournament's going to be awesome to watch. It feels like it's going to be relatively easy to predict with Crazy Raccoon dominating everyone. I mean, maybe Falcons can renew the rivalry and make things interesting there, but them plus Zeta division probably roll over everybody yet again, if I had to take a guess. But 4 through 7 is where things could get really fun, and we could witness some of the best matches of all of OWCS this year. The race is on. It's the final countdown. November couldn't get here any sooner. Let me know your thoughts about OWCS Korea Stage 2 down in the comments below. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe to this channel if you're new so you can stay up to date with all the most recent OWCS action.